All right, take a listen to this next story. Back in 1997, our next guest was sitting at a cafe in Jerusalem when a homicide bomber detonated two suitcase-packed explosives. Dan Miller was severely injured in the explosion and later sued the Iranian government for supporting those terrorists. Despite a ruling in his favor, the Iranian government never paid Danny or any of the victims a dime. Now, years later, Dan Miller is fighting the Obama administration, yes, the Obama administration, to get Iran to pay up. Joining us right now to explain his side of the story, Daniel Miller and his esteemed attorney, Ted Olson. Welcome to both of you. Dan, first off, this happened. What was your avenue for some financial recourse?
Well, Congress passed a law that allowed terror victims of state-sponsored terrorism abroad to sue in United States courts to be able to collect money for compensation for their physical and mental injuries.
And that pathway, Ted Olson, is something that you could help him reclaim some funds to get himself literally back on his feet again. How is that going legally?
Well, it's going well in the sense that Daniel and his co-plaintiffs have received a judgment from the courts. Iran has been held liable and responsible for the terrorist acts that maimed Daniel. There's a judgment against Iran, but we're trying to find Iran's assets so that we can collect on the judgment. And the courts, with the help of the United States government, have been resisting and helping Iran hide their assets in the United States. It's really inexplicable that the United States government is taking the side of Iran as opposed to the side of its own citizens who were victims of terrorism.
So what is it like being in the courtroom seeing the Justice Department fight for the other guys?
It is very frustrating and difficult to explain to our clients that the United States is supporting Iran as opposed to its own citizens, especially in light of the fact that Congress explicitly passed a law to allow American citizens to recover against state-sponsored terrorism.
So, Dan, does this mean anything to you? The DOJ says the U.S. courts require if the U.S. courts require foreign governments to disclose their assets, it impedes the state's ability to conduct foreign relations. Does that mean anything to you?
Yeah, in my opinion, since when do we let terrorists dictate foreign policy? The foreign policy should be that if you injure American citizens anywhere around the world, your assets are not safe. And perhaps that will create a deterrent for the governments in the future that if they know they have to give up all of their assets, if they do support such terrorists, such atrocious attacks, that will prevent attacks in the future and perhaps save lives.
You know, they also sponsor Hezbollah and Hamas, and the amount of people they kill and maim is just huge. Ted, in the big picture now, we know we have frozen assets here in Iran since '79. Why can't you get access to them, to that?
Well, we are trying to determine where those assets are, what they might be being used for, so that we can attach them. You asked the question about the foreign policy. That was determined by Congress. Congress passed a law that says that foreign governments, if they support terrorism, have to be responsible and their assets have to be subject to recovery by those victims of terrorism. And we can't find the assets, and the United States is helping Iran hide them.
Well, Ted, we're going to keep the spotlight on. Thanks so much for getting up early and telling us this story, and we want to stay with it. Dan, sorry you were hit, but I'm glad you're fighting back. Dan Miller, Ted Olson, thanks so much.
Thank you.